All right. Well, welcome everyone tonight. I know that many people weren't able to be there last week and missed the introduction to what we're going to talk about tonight. But let me just quickly go through a bit of a review for those of you who missed it. So, we've been talking about how to live on the front foot, even in the margins. We talked about the reality that many of us feel like we're on the back foot when it comes to sharing our faith because we talked about some of the reality of our situation for our young people in our schools, for possibly you in your workplace or in conversations you have with your family. What we believe to be good news, unfortunately, is not always received as good news in our culture. And then we looked for a while at Paul and Acts 14, 15, 16, 17, how Paul studied his culture for gospel effectiveness. And we talked about what he did in Athens and how he studied a culture that was different than his. And he figured out some ways to effectively share with the people there the good news of Jesus. So, after we looked at Paul and the culture he found himself in Athens, then we jumped to looking at what is our cultural moment. And this is really where we spent a lot of our time. And it's heavy. The reality is that many who we would try to share faith with believe that our Christian faith is intellectually embarrassing. Some who we try to share faith with may believe that our faith is emotionally irrelevant. And third, some who we try to share faith with even believe that our faith is morally harmful. And we sat with that for a little while and did some reflecting on, is this our experience? Is this what we find? Um, so, if we're not careful, we'll find ourselves frustrated and discouraged and doubting. And that's why the Bible says in 1 Peter 3:15, we need to always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. And so we need to be ready to engage on topics like, has science disproved God? Why bother with faith if I'm happy? And is Christianity morally harmful to individuals or to the society? We need to prepare ourselves. And that's really, in one more evening of talking about this, I want to point you in the direction of how you can prepare yourself, how you can be equipped in your own time, your own learning, to be able to give an answer to everyone who asks you for the hope that you have. So, how can we be prepared? First of all, we need to find answers. We need to take the time to find the answers to the questions that others have. But secondly, we need to become people who ask questions of our friends, of our work colleagues, of people at school. And third, we need to love others. And that's the one we're not going to talk about. We talk about that on a regular basis. And I think we can always grow in how we're loving others, how we're listening to others. But we do talk about that on a regular basis. And I think you're pretty good at it. Today, we're going to talk about finding answers and becoming people who ask questions. So far from being intellectually embarrassing, I believe that Christian faith is actually intellectually compelling, and there are compelling reasons to believe in a creator God. Now, it's really important for us and for young people, for you especially, to remember that there are Christian scientists and mathematicians and chemists and physicists and people who study stars and all of those types of things that have faith and yet are sciences. There are scientists at the very top of their field in NASA or the Human Genome Project that are writing and talking about how science is not at odds with Christian faith. It's important to know also that there are limits to what science can tell us. Science can tell us how things work, but not always why things work. So we're going to start out here with a video from Professor John Lennox of Oxford University. He's a professor of mathematics, and he's written a book called Can Science Explain Everything? And here's just a little promo for that book.
One of the big issues that provokes the idea that science and God are in conflict is the idea that many people have of God, actually. They think God is like a Greek deity, invented to cover up our lack of understanding. So if you don't know what lightning is, you have a God of lightning. And we call a God like that a God of the gaps, because once we discover how lightning works, the God disappears. And if you define God to be like that, of course you have to choose between God and science, because that's the way you define God. The God of the Bible is not a God like that. Genesis says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. That is, he created the whole show, everything. The bits we do understand, the bits we don't. And interestingly, it's the bits we do understand that powerfully point towards him. And I often think of Isaac Newton when he discovered the law of gravity. He didn't say, now I've got gravity, I don't need God. What he said was, what a genius of a God that does it that way. The fact that the pioneers of modern science, as we might call it, like Galileo, Kepler, Newton, coming up to Clerk Maxwell, were believers in God, I'm not sure how well known it is. And I find many school-level kids have never heard this. Because, of course, it means that far from belief in God hindering the rise of science, it was the motor that drove it. The reason for writing Can Science Explain Everything is to show people that actually the truth is that science points towards God, not away from him. And also to go into the question of the rationality of Christianity. Not simply can we reconcile science and faith in God, which we can, I believe, but to show that Christianity is a rational belief system. And we can think about, for example, events like the resurrection of Jesus rationally. We're not going beyond rationality or committing intellectual suicide. So that's basically the reason for writing the book.
So there's a scientist called Frank Rhodes, and he's a geologist. He's the president of Cornell University, and he shared this very helpful illustration that we can all understand. He said, why is the kettle boiling? Now, someone might say, well, heat is applied and the molecules in the water are starting to move faster and faster, and as they move faster, a boiling point is reached, and this is a scientific explanation for why the kettle is boiling. And it's true. But it only shows one side of reality, because someone else might say the answer to the question of why is the kettle boiling is that I wanted a cup of tea. Guys, another thing that we really need to be aware of is there's a whole stream of people, especially among some of the atheistic writers, who want you to believe that the only truth that is available to us is scientific truth. They want us to believe that the only true things that we can rely on is something that's scientifically proven. And that's just not the case. There is more truth out there than just scientifically proven truth. So, you may say, well, where do I start? If I wanted to be able to, with confidence, say, I believe that that science is actually revealing God. If you wanted to be able to say that with confidence, where would you start to be able to do that? Well, I think a really good place to start would be to look at intelligent design, and specifically the fine-tuning of the universe. So let me get my PowerPoint back up here again. So if we really wanted to help people see that science reveals God rather than explaining God away, we might need to look at the fact that the universe is finely tuned for life. Fine-tuning refers to the surprising precision of nature's physical constants and the early conditions of the universe. To explain how a habitable planet like Earth could even exist, these fundamental constants have to be set to just the right values, like tuning a dial to find just the right radio station. If the universe had physical constants with even slightly different values, the universe simply could not support life. It would expand too quickly, or never form carbon atoms, or never make complex molecules like DNA. So let's just watch a real quick 3-minute video about this.
From galaxies and stars, down to atoms and subatomic particles, the very structure of our universe is determined by these numbers. These are the fundamental constants and quantities of the universe. Scientists have come to the shocking realization that each of these numbers has been carefully dialed to an astonishingly precise value, a value that falls within an exceedingly narrow, life-permitting range. If any one of these numbers were altered by even a hair's breadth, no physical, interactive life of any kind could exist anywhere. There'd be no stars, no life, no planets, no chemistry. Consider gravity, for example. The force of gravity is determined by the gravitational constant. If this constant varied by just 1 in 10 to the 60th parts, none of us would exist. To understand how exceedingly narrow this life-permitting range is, imagine a dial divided into 10 to the 60th increments. To get a handle on how many tiny points on the dial this is, compare it to the number of cells in your body, or the number of seconds that have ticked by since time began. If the gravitational constant had been out of tune by just one of these infinitesimally small increments, the universe would either have expanded and thinned out so rapidly that no stars could form and life couldn't exist, or it would have collapsed back on itself with the same result: no stars, no planets, and no life. Or consider the expansion rate of the universe. This is driven by the cosmological constant. A change in its value by a mere 1 part in 10 to the 120th parts would cause the universe to expand too rapidly or too slowly. In either case, the universe would, again, be life-prohibiting. Or another example of fine-tuning. If the mass and energy of the early universe were not evenly distributed to an incomprehensible precision of 1 part in 10 to the 10 to the 123rd, the universe would be hostile to life of any kind. The fact is, our universe permits physical, interactive life only because these, and many other numbers, have been independently and exquisitely balanced on a razor's edge. Wherever physicists look, they see examples of fine-tuning. The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. If anyone claims not to be surprised by the special features that the universe has, he's hiding his head in the sand. These special features are surprising and unlikely.
If you are interested in where do I get started, so I can say with confidence that creation reveals God. It doesn't. The fine-tuning argument doesn't prove God, but there is a compelling case that by looking at the super intellect that must have put together the different forces in the universe so that our universe can support life, I think there's a really good case that actually reveals that there must be something behind our universe, rather than disprove it. So that's a good place to start. I just wanted to point out these 2 books. So Can Science Explain Everything is a book that John Lennox has written. It's not long. It's a pretty small book. And another one called Am I Just My Brain? Also by Sharon Dix. These are 2 British authors. And you can get these on Amazon. They're published by the Good Book Company. Then another resource I want to point you to is this is YouTube. And if you search for Reboot Youth Apologetics, you will come to Reboot. So Reboot is a sub-ministry of the Oxford Center for Christian Apologetics. And they do youth apologetics days where they're helping equip young people. But they've also really, over the last few years, put tons of money and time into creating short videos for young people answering some of their biggest questions. And so when you go on their YouTube channel, it's all organized by, so here's a line of questions on science, and you can look up a whole lot of different questions on science. And we have their Dr. Lennox and his full talk, 42 minutes, on does science disprove God? Questions on suffering, questions on women, on culture. They have these all short videos that are explained in a way that young people can understand them. So I go there to get, when I have a question, I get my first understanding from these videos, and then maybe I'll go on to something a little bit more academic and more philosophical as I start to get my head around an answer. But this is a really, really great resource. Reboot Youth Apologetics for short video answers to lots of questions. So in order to be able to help people see that the gospel is actually emotionally satisfying, we need to help answer the question, well, why bother with God if I'm happy? So to be able to talk with our friends and our family who believe that they don't need God because they're happy just as they are, we need to start to ask some good questions. This is one of the areas that I think we have to become better question askers, because we're not going to information people towards the gospel. We're going to need to ask them thoughtful questions. And one question that I want to challenge you to add to your repertoire, and I'm just starting to add this one to my list of questions, is what makes a good life? So I know you think, well, that's a clanger, Joy. I could never ask my friends or family that. I'm actually thinking about having a conversation with a friend who she told me about 5 years ago. Well, my husband and I, we're not religious, but her and I walk on a regular basis and talk and share things about our life. And I know she has lots of values and has firm ideas about what makes her have a good life. And so I'm going to ask her the next time we go for a walk. I'm going to just say, I know you've told me in the past that you're not religious in any way, but I see you living out a life with lots of different values. And so when you talk to your kids, what do you tell them makes a good life? What should they aim for? And I just want to hear what she says, what she believes makes a good life. We also need to be able to gently ask, is happiness enough? And I know you can equally wonder, how would I ever work that in? But I think even starting with young people in your life, when you're asking them what they want to do, I listen to hopes and dreams of young people, and it all has to do with a lot of success and happiness and pleasure. And starting to ask, is that success or happiness going to be enough to give you a good life, and to maybe start a conversation that way. Then we need to be able to gently suggest, when it's appropriate, that it's possible that being happy is not enough. Our celebrities show this to us all the time. At the peak of all that this world has to offer, happiness, money, fame, recognition, we see our celebrities snared by addiction to escape pain, suffering from ill mental health, and sadly, some even ending their lives. And we know that the gospel tells us that happiness is not enough. What it means to be human, a good and fulfilling human life, needs more than just happiness. It also needs purpose and truth. And then I just want to encourage you also to remain faithful in prayer for the people in your life who find our faith irrelevant, and I've told you as much, because this is the other reality. The pandemic has shown us that at some point suffering comes to everyone. And in the moments that mean the most to us, we are powerless. Okay, so we really were powerless for a long time over this pandemic. I sit with parents of a young person who is plunged into a dark depression, and they're hurting themselves, and they're contemplating ending their life, and they cannot function um, in normal ways that a young person should be able to function. And I sit with these parents, and I can see the depth of sadness they feel because they're sad for their young person, but they also are completely powerless. This is the thing that means the most to them. And they're completely powerless to evoke any change over the things their young person is feeling and thinking and experiencing. When we sit with a person, a family member, someone who has received a diagnosis that their life is going to be cut short by disease of some kind, we are completely powerless in those moments and out of control, not able to bring any change. So it's in these moments that we have to at least be able to say, I see you are hurting, and I see you feel powerless, and I know you don't believe in God, but I do, because I am powerless, and I need God in these moments, and I will bring you and your needs before Him. Um, I need God's help. That's why I believe in God, is because I too feel that powerlessness. So let's just go over this one more time. We need to be asking people questions like, well, what do you think makes a good life? What do you think makes a full human life? Is love and happiness and success, is that enough? And if someone in turn asks you, well, what do you think makes a good life? Man, I sure hope you're prepared. I sure hope we're prepared to give gospel answers. Okay, we believe humans were made for love that is unconditional. We believe that humans are made for fascination and awe, and we express that in worship and connection to the living God. And we believe that humans um, have the best life when they know why they've been created and they have meaning and purpose. So I hope you can speak the gospel into that if you ever get a chance to talk about what you think makes a flourishing human life. And then reminding you that suffering comes to everyone. And when it matters the most, we are powerless. So keep praying for, keep loving people who currently feel like faith is irrelevant, because unfortunately, we don't wish suffering on anyone, but it does come to everyone. And you can stand in the gap between them and God when those moments come in their life. And on this point of suffering, of course, one of the biggest apologetical questions that we face is, why would a loving God allow suffering? So there's lots of places you can research and learn more about that, including some of the websites that I showed you earlier. But more than anything, I want you to learn to ask questions. So if someone says, I don't believe in God because um, so many people suffer. You don't need 101 answers or lots of information. You just need to be armed with this question. Well, what do you think? Why do you think God allows suffering? Or why do you think that? Why do you think that a loving God could not, there couldn't be a loving God if there was suffering? Ask them to tell you more about what they think. Um, and then continuing, you can ask them, well, do you feel like God's made you suffer in some way? And some people, they say, I don't believe in God because of suffering, but the reality is they do believe in God. They're just angry at him that they've been suffering. And so you can get to know their experience, and you can find out, is this person actually an atheist, or is this person just angry at God? And if they're angry at God, you can work with that. We can talk through that, and there's places you can go, but you just need to ask more questions. Why do you think that? So add that question to your repertoire of questions. Well, why do you think that? And genuinely listen to the answer. Now, if you have someone that you talk to that is coming from more of a philosophical standpoint, maybe they haven't suffered themselves, but just the philosophical argument of, well, I can't believe in God because there's suffering in the world, then this is another thing you can do. Um, they're saying I'm an atheist because there's suffering in the world. Well, then ask them, well, where do you think, as an atheist, suffering comes from? Why is there so much suffering in the world? Do you think there's any meaning in suffering? Do we suffer for any reason? Because if they're an atheist and if they're true to their belief system, they have to answer no. And that's a really hopeless place to be. So, Richard Dawkins, who is one of the high profile atheistic writers that I've mentioned earlier, he says this: in a universe of electrons and selfish genes, blind physical forces, and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt and other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason to it, nor any justice. The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at the bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. Guys, the atheists don't have good answers for why are we suffering? Why is there suffering? Their answer is some people are going to get hurt and others are going to get lucky, because there's just natural forces working themselves out in our universe. This has not been my experience. The Christian gospel is replete with the truth that God can bring beauty from ashes, good from suffering. And as we follow Jesus into the way of the cross, our lives should give testimony to the fact that in our darkest moments, he gives us himself. And that is our hope. All right, so the last one we want to address is Christianity morally harmful? Because we want to show that the gospel is good for the individual and for society. The world created by atheism is a scary and morally void place. And I want to go back to that quote that we just looked at from Richard Dawkins. All right, so again, remember, atheism and naturalism are married together. So atheism, because there's no God to cause anything, the only causes are electrons, our selfish genes, our DNA working itself out in all living creatures, and blind physical forces that hold the physical world together. That's the only thing happening in our world. There is no supernatural intervention in our world and no supernatural cause. And in this world, some people are going to excel, the strong survive and the weak die. So some people are going to get hurt and other people are going to get lucky. You won't find any rhyme or reason to it, nor any justice. Dawkins draws attention to the fact that at the bottom of an atheistic universe, there's no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, and nothing but pitiless indifference. And I just want to look specifically at this idea that there's no evil and no good. You guys, atheism, I believe, is devaluing to the individual. The weak get trodden on. We don't care for the weak. In a culture that is truly living out its atheistic values, the weak are going to get hurt, and that's just how it is. I believe that atheism is devaluing to the individual. I don't believe that it makes people shows the value of people. Atheism purports that there's no evil, which, when taken to an extreme, opens up our society to genocide, to fascism. It turns our society into a world where no one is held responsible for their actions when taken to its natural extension. Okay, so the world that atheism creates is not more secure and peaceful for the individual and society. Rather, I believe the world that atheism creates is potentially chaotic and a very scary place morally. All right, I just want to share with you another really great online resource. So this is called bethinking.org, and maybe some of you have discovered it before, but it's put out by the University and Colleges Christian Fellowship group, and they have an excellent resource website here where there's all sorts of articles that you can read on a whole variety of topics. And all right, so one of the topics that you might need to be equipped on is are Christians against diversity? And I hope that you're able to articulate the truth that God created diversity in the unique ways that He knit together all people of all races. One of the topics you might need to look into are Christians sexist? And you might need to do some equipping of yourself to see how Jesus elevated women far beyond what the culture allowed. Another topic that falls under this is, are Christians intolerant? And I think, let me share one more quote with you here. Jesus does not engage in the power plays of this world. Jesus cannot be used to press others down, because Jesus modeled service, putting weapons down, loving your enemies, which goes beyond tolerance. Just imagine a society that would honor others as greater than themselves. The ethic that Jesus gives of loving our enemy goes way beyond tolerance. And maybe there's some reading and work you can do around being able to articulate Jesus's ethic of loving others and loving your enemies. So the last topic under this is Christianity good for the individual and the culture that you really need to work with is around sexuality. And that's something that I've been journeying in, Darren and I have been journeying in for many years as we worked with young people. It's taken me many years to figure out how to articulate how the gospel is still good news for a young person who is same-sex attracted, or how the gospel is still good news for a young person who has gender dysphoria. It's taken me a long time to be able to figure out, if I had a conversation with these young people who are coming in and out of the youth group, how can I say that the gospel is still good news for them? And it's been a long process. So I just want to suggest one book, and this is in that same series as Dr. Lennox's book. This is called Why Does God Care Who I Sleep With? Okay, and this is by a gentleman named Sam Allberry. And if you haven't,
God cares who we sleep with because He cares about us. Who we sleep with matters to us. It affects us deeply, and so it would be unusual if God didn't care who we slept with. So the title of the book is Why Does God Care Who I Sleep With?, which I think is one of the big questions we get asked today. And so I've written it because I care about the kinds of issues people are wrestling with. And this is one of the biggest reasons people would offer for not wanting to investigate Christianity. So it matters to me because I see it mattering so much to other people. Speaking publicly on this issue for the last several years has really given me a sense of where people are at and where the confusion is, where the questions are. And so really it's a book trying to introduce people to what Jesus thinks about these issues and why what He says is so compelling. One of the unique insights the Christian faith gives us is sex is something that's meant to be given and not taken. It's not that someone else has a sexuality that I take from to satisfy myself, but God has given me a sexuality that is meant to be a gift given to another person in a very particular context. One writer said that sex is a way of giving yourself to another person exclusively, fully, and permanently, whereas we've turned it into something that we take from someone kind of fleetingly, temporarily, and cheaply. We've really turned it around from what it's designed to be, what it's designed to mean, and therefore what it's designed to do for us, into something that's almost a photo negative of that. That Christianity has sexual boundaries is not unique. Everyone has sexual boundaries. The question is, where do we draw those boundaries and what is the basis for drawing them there? And most people today would say, well, the only boundary really is consent and that the other person be an adult. Christianity believes in drawing the boundaries more carefully than that, for the very simple reason that we believe that what undergirds everything Christians believe about sex and boundaries and all those kinds of things, is a deep conviction that Jesus Christ is good. And therefore, if he is our creator, then he knows what is going to be best for us. And therefore, we want to live within the constraints he gives us, because those are going to be the constraints in which we can really flourish and live out our full humanity. And that actually contradicting his ways is going to diminish our humanity in one way or another. Writing this book made me more aware of the ways in which my own heart is naturally skewed on this issue. So I found it very challenging just personally. It was also actually encouraging. One of the chapters I really enjoyed writing was What If I've Messed Up? Because it just reminded me that God is for sexually broken people. And so there's such reassuring safety in Jesus Christ that I really hope people will see that, even in the context of a difficult and sensitive area like this. And I hope it will make some people maybe even think about following Jesus for the first time.
All right, I know I said that was the last thing, but one more quick website for you to investigate. I want to direct your attention to livingout.org. As you can see there, vision is to help churches and society talk about faith and sexuality, and they do it really, really well. So check out livingout.org, and it's going to help answer a lot of different questions and give lots of different testimonies from people who believe that the Bible does give us boundaries to our sexuality, but at the same time, they are experiencing same-sex attraction. So what do they do with that? And how is the gospel good news? And as you can see, some of the articles you can read is, what does God really say in the Bible about our sexuality? Isn't the Christian sexual ethic harmful and repressive? Which may be a question you get. And it would help to be able to understand more about how the Christian sexual ethic is not harmful and is not repressive. Is it possible to live as a same-sex attracted Christian without compromising biblical teaching? So this is one more really great website for you to check out is livingout.org. All right, that's all I have for tonight. Again, we need to continue to find answers and ask questions. And if you get in a conversation with somebody and you don't have answers necessarily to their objections or the things that they raise, you can always say, I'd like to look into that and come back to you. I do that a lot. But also ask them why they believe the thing that they believe. Why do you think that? And first listen to them as well. The gospel is good news for everyone. And our culture changes so fast. I know it feels overwhelming to try to keep up with how to help people understand, in the face of all the different things that our culture throws at us, how the gospel is good news. But there are lots of really good resources out there that can help equip you. And again, I just want to encourage you to talk to the elders if there's a specific topic that you want us to dive more deep into and have more time spent on.